The telegram arrived in Great Bend, Kansas, on a sweltering afternoon in July of 1878, announcing that Penelope Louise Langford would be arriving on the next train to take up residence with her aunt. And the entire town braced themselves like they were preparing for a tornado. Penelope Louise Langford, as she insisted on being called despite what the telegram said, stepped off that train 3 days later in a flurry of lavender skirts and an endless stream of observations about absolutely everything her eyes touched. Within her first 5 minutes on the platform, she had already commented on the heat, the dust, the smell of cattle, the interesting architectural choices of the station house, the peculiar way the station master wore his hat, and whether the water tower might benefit from a fresh coat of paint. Her Aunt Martha, a stern woman who had lived in Great Bend for 30 years and had learned the art of speaking only when absolutely necessary, looked at her niece with something between horror and resignation. The ride from the station to the small house on the edge of town took 15 minutes, during which Penelope did not stop talking once. She discussed the train journey from Philadelphia, the various people she had met, the meals served in the dining car, the landscape of each state they passed through, her thoughts on westward expansion, a book she had been reading about Kansas history, and her theories about why the sky seemed bigger out here than it did back home. By the time they reached the house, Aunt Martha had developed a headache that would last 3 days. Great Bend in 1878 was a cattle town, a place where men came to work hard, drink hard, and sleep hard before doing it all over again. It was not a place for endless conversation. The men who drove cattle up from Texas were quiet, dusty figures who said what needed saying and nothing more. The shopkeepers conducted business with nods and grunts. Even the women, gathered for quilting circles or church socials, spoke in measured tones about practical matters. Into this world of comfortable silence, Penelope arrived like a 4th of July fireworks display, and the town did not quite know what to make of her. Within a week, the general store owner had taken to hiding in the back room when he saw her coming. The local seamstress started claiming she was fully booked. Even the minister, a patient man who prided himself on Christian charity, found himself inventing urgent pastoral duties whenever Penelope approached after services. They said she talked too much for the quiet West. They said it at the saloon, at the feed store, at the hotel restaurant. They said it with a mixture of bewilderment and exhaustion, as if they had encountered some force of nature they had no equipment to handle. Penelope, for her part, seemed utterly oblivious to the effect she had on people. She would walk down the main street of Great Bend, her parasol twirling, commenting on everything from the quality of the boardwalks to the health of the horses tied to the hitching posts. She volunteered at the church, where she reorganized the hymnal cupboard while providing a detailed history of each hymn. She helped at the schoolhouse, where the teacher discovered that having Penelope read to the children meant the children never had a chance to participate, because she would invariably launch into explanations and tangents that could last the entire afternoon. It was at the church social in August that Penelope first encountered Colton Orion. He was leaning against the wall of the meeting hall, a tall figure in worn denim and a hat pulled low over his eyes. Colton had arrived in Great Bend 2 months earlier, hired on at the Morrison Ranch to help with the summer cattle drive. He was 24, originally from Montana, and had the reputation of being the quietest man in a quiet town. Some of the other ranch hands joked that they had worked alongside him for weeks and had heard him speak maybe 20 words total. Penelope noticed him immediately, primarily because he was the only person at the social who was not actively trying to avoid her. Everyone else had developed a sixth sense for when she entered a room, creating a subtle shifting pattern as they maneuvered themselves out of conversation range. But this cowboy just stood there, seemingly unaware that he should be fleeing. She approached him with the determination of a general planning a campaign, her plate of cake balanced carefully in one hand. He watched her come with the same patient expression he might have while watching a cloud drift across the sky. "Hello," she said brightly. "I do not believe we have been introduced." She paused to take a breath, and in that brief moment Colton spoke. His voice was low and rough from disuse, but there was a gentleness to it that caught her off guard. "Colton Orion, madam, pleasure to meet you." "Oh, how lovely," Penelope continued, barely missing a beat. "I do," Colton said, and something in those two words made Penelope pause for the first time since arriving in Kansas. She looked at him more carefully. He had not moved away. He had not made an excuse. He was just standing there, his gray eyes fixed on her face, actually listening. It was such a novel experience that she found herself momentarily speechless. "You do?" she finally said, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "The stars," he said. "They are bigger out here, worth looking at." "Yes," Penelope said. "Yes, exactly." They stood there for a moment in silence, which might have been the longest Penelope had been quiet in weeks. Then her natural inclination toward conversation reasserted itself. "Are you working on one of the nearby ranches?" "The Morrison Ranch," Colton said when she paused. "Sorry about your folks." The sympathy in his voice was genuine, and Penelope felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. Most people, when she mentioned her parents' death, either changed the subject quickly or offered such stiff condolences that she immediately started talking about something else to avoid the awkwardness. But there was something in the way this quiet cowboy said those 4 words that felt more comforting than all the elaborate speeches of sympathy she had received back home. "Thank you," she said softly. Then, because vulnerability had never been comfortable for her, she launched back into safer territory. "The Morrison Ranch, that is one of the larger operations, is it not?" "I have heard people talking about it. Apparently they have some of the finest cattle in the region. Though I confess I know very little about cattle, except that they are large and somewhat intimidating. I saw a herd being driven through town last week, and the noise was extraordinary, and the smell, goodness. But I suppose that is just part of life here." "It is," Colton agreed. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, so brief that Penelope almost missed it. But it was there, and it did something strange to her heart rhythm. They talked, or rather, Penelope talked and Colton listened, for the remainder of the social. She told him about Philadelphia, about her childhood, about the books she loved, about her theories on everything from agriculture to architecture. And Colton stood there, occasionally offering a word or two, but mostly just watching her with those steady gray eyes. When she finally had to leave because Aunt Martha was ready to go home, Penelope felt oddly disappointed. "It was very nice talking with you," she said. "Or rather, talking at you, I suppose, since I did most of the talking, which I am told I do too much of, but you did not seem to mind. Or at least you were too polite to say so, which I appreciate." "I liked listening," Colton said, and those 3 words would replay in Penelope's mind for the rest of the night. Over the following weeks, Penelope found herself noticing Colton around town. He came in on Saturdays usually, along with some of the other ranch hands, to pick up supplies or have a drink at the saloon. While the other men made themselves scarce when they saw her coming, Colton never did. He would nod at her, touch the brim of his hat, and if she stopped to talk, he would stop to listen. It became a pattern. Penelope would see him and launch into whatever was on her mind that day, her voice bright and rapid, her hands gesturing expressively as she spoke. And Colton would stand there, patient as the Kansas plains, occasionally offering a quiet word or two that somehow always seemed to be exactly the right thing to say. The town, naturally, noticed. They noticed everything in Great Bend, where entertainment was scarce and other people's business was the most interesting thing available. The general consensus was that poor Colton Orion was too polite to tell the Langford girl to leave him alone, and that it was a shame such a decent man was being subjected to such an assault of words. But if they had bothered to look closely, they would have seen that Colton never looked trapped. He never looked for an escape route. Instead, he looked at Penelope the way a man might look at a beautiful painting or a perfect sunset, with a kind of quiet appreciation that needed no words to explain itself. In September, Great Bend prepared for the annual Harvest Festival, a celebration that brought people in from the surrounding ranches and farms. Penelope threw herself into the preparations with characteristic enthusiasm, volunteering for every committee and offering suggestions on everything from the placement of the booths to the selection of music for the dance. The day of the festival dawned clear and hot. By noon, the main street was crowded with people, and the smell of roasting meat and fresh baked goods filled the air. Penelope wore her best dress, a deep blue thing with cream-colored trim that her mother had made for her before she died. She had her hair pinned up in a way that Aunt Martha had grudgingly admitted looked quite nice. She was helping at the pie booth when she saw Colton arrive with some of the other Morrison Ranch hands. He had cleaned up, trading his dusty work clothes for newer denim and a pressed shirt. He had even shaved, revealing a strong jawline that Penelope had not fully appreciated before. Her heart did that strange, fluttering thing again, and she found herself smoothing her skirts nervously. He saw her and made his way over, moving through the crowd with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Miss Langford," he said, touching his hat brim, "you look real pretty today." It was possibly the longest unsolicited statement she had ever heard him make, and it left her, for the second time in her acquaintance with him, momentarily speechless. She could feel heat rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Kansas sun. "Thank you," she managed. "You look very nice too, I mean. You always look nice, in a rugged frontier way, but today you look particularly nice. Not that I spend a lot of time looking at you, I mean. I notice you because one notices people, generally, not in any specific way. Though of course you are noticeable being so tall and, well, anyway, thank you." That almost smile appeared again, a little more pronounced this time. "Would you save me a dance later?" he asked. "Yes," Penelope said immediately. "You are," Colton said. "It is just for fun here, do not have to be perfect." "Oh, good," Penelope said, relieved. "Then yes, I will definitely save you a dance or several dances if you would like, I mean, if you do not get tired of me stepping on your feet." "I will risk it," Colton said, and this time his smile was full and genuine, transforming his usually serious face into something that made Penelope's breath catch. The afternoon passed in a blur of activities. Penelope helped sell pies, watched the horse races, and provided running commentary on absolutely everything to anyone within earshot. She was aware, in the back of her mind, of where Colton was at all times, as if some part of her had developed a sixth sense specifically attuned to his presence. As evening approached and the musicians began setting up for the dance, Penelope felt her nervousness increase. She had told Colton she was not a good dancer, but that had been something of an understatement. She was, in fact, a terrible dancer, and the few young men who had attempted to partner with her at Philadelphia socials had usually ended the experience with crushed toes and wounded dignity. When Colton appeared at her elbow as the first song started, Penelope almost suggested they skip the dancing and just talk instead. But he offered his hand with such quiet confidence that she found herself taking it and following him onto the makeshift dance floor. "I really am awful at this," she warned as he placed his hand on her waist. "I tend to talk and forget to count the steps, and then everything goes wrong, and honestly it might be safer for your feet if we just sit this out." "Talk all you want," Colton said, pulling her into the dance. "I will handle the steps." And he did. Colton moved with a surprising grace for such a tall man, leading her firmly enough that she did not have to worry about where her feet went. He simply guided her, adjusting smoothly whenever she stumbled, never once looking frustrated or impatient. Penelope, true to form, talked through the entire first dance. She talked about the music, about the other couples on the floor, about how she had expected frontier dancing to be more wild and woolly, about how surprisingly accomplished a dancer he was. And Colton listened, his gray eyes fixed on her face, occasionally murmuring a word or two but mostly just guiding her through the movements while she chattered away. They danced through 3 songs before taking a break. As Colton led her off the floor toward the refreshment table, they passed a group of older women from the church. Penelope heard one of them, Mrs. Henderson, speaking in a voice that was clearly meant to be overheard. "That poor Orion boy," Mrs. Henderson said. "Trapped by that Gabby Langford girl. Someone ought to rescue him. She talks more than any woman I have ever met, hardly appropriate for the West." Penelope felt her steps falter. The words hit harder than they should have, probably because she had been having such a lovely time that she had forgotten for a few hours that her talkativeness was something people found tiresome. She glanced up at Colton, expecting to see confirmation of Mrs. Henderson's assessment, some sign that he was indeed just being polite and would welcome a rescue. But Colton's face had gone hard in a way she had never seen before. He steered her past the women, got her a cup of punch, and then turned back toward the group. His voice when he spoke was quiet but carried clearly in the evening air. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Henderson," he said, "but I was not trapped. I asked Miss Langford to dance because I wanted to, and she can talk as much as she likes. I happen to love her voice." The last 4 words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that fell over that corner of the festival. Mrs. Henderson looked flustered. Her companions looked shocked. And Penelope, standing there with her cup of punch, felt as if the entire world had just shifted on its axis. Colton turned back to her, his expression softening. "Would you like to take a walk?" he asked. Penelope, for perhaps the first time in her entire life, could not think of a single thing to say. She just nodded. They walked away from the festival, past the edge of town, out to where the prairie stretched endlessly under the darkening sky. The music faded behind them, replaced by the sound of crickets and the whisper of wind through the grass. Colton did not say anything, and for once, neither did Penelope. They just walked, side by side, while the first stars began to appear overhead. Finally, when they were far enough from town that the lights of the festival were just aglow on the horizon, Colton stopped. He looked down at Penelope, his face serious in the starlight. "I meant what I said back there," he told her. "About your voice, I like listening to you talk." "But I talk too much," Penelope said, her own voice small. "Everyone says so. I have always talked too much. Even back home, people found it exhausting. My mother used to say I was born talking and never found a reason to stop. I know I should try to be quieter, more like other women out here, but I just cannot seem to manage it. My mind moves so fast and there is always so much to say, and it just comes pouring out, and I know it drives people mad, but I do not know how to stop." "Why would you want to stop?" Colton asked. The question surprised her so much that she actually paused before answering. "Because it bothers people, because it is not proper, Because women are supposed to be quiet and demure, and I am neither of those things. You are you, Colton said simply. That is enough. More than enough. He reached out and took her hand, his work-roughened fingers gentle against her skin. I have been quiet my whole life, he continued. Not because I was trying to be, just because I never had much to say. People always told me I should talk more, be more sociable, but it never felt right, trying to fill up silence with words I did not need to speak. When I met you at that church social, I thought you were the most interesting person I had ever met. You see everything, notice everything, think about everything, and you want to share all of it. That is not a flaw, Penelope. That is a gift. Tears stung Penelope's eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever suggested that her constant talking might be something other than an annoying habit to be corrected. I like the way you see the world, Colton said quietly, and I like that you let me see it through your eyes. These past few weeks, listening to you talk about everything from town history to cloud formations, it has been like seeing Great Bend for the first time. You make ordinary things interesting. You make me notice things I would have just passed by. Really, Penelope whispered. Really, Colton confirmed. He stepped closer, his hand still holding hers. And I will tell you something else. I think I am falling in love with you. Maybe already fell, that first night at the social when you talked for 45 minutes straight about everything and nothing, and I could have listened for 45 more. Penelope's heart was beating so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. I think I am falling in love with you too, she said. Colton smiled, a full, genuine smile that lit up his whole face. Then, with a gentleness that made Penelope's breath catch, he leaned down and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste, formal kisses Penelope had experienced from the few suitors who had attempted to court her back in Philadelphia. This was warm and deep and full of promise. Colton kissed her like she was something precious, something worth cherishing. And when they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Penelope discovered that being kissed thoroughly was apparently one of the few things that could actually stop her from talking. Wow, she finally managed. Yeah, Colton agreed. They stood there under the emerging stars, holding hands and grinning at each other like fools. In the distance, the festival continued, but neither of them felt any urge to return just yet. They had found something more interesting right here. Can I court you properly? Colton asked. I do not have much. Ranch hands wages and a small savings, but I am a hard worker and I can provide for you, maybe not right away, but eventually. I do not need much, Penelope said. Just you, just this. Someone who lets me be myself. Someone who does not need me to be quieter or more proper or more anything than exactly what I am. That is worth more than all the money in the world. You have that, Colton promised. Always will if I have any say in it. They walked back to town slowly, taking the long way, talking and not talking, just being together. When they finally returned to the festival, Aunt Martha was waiting with a stern expression that softened slightly when she saw how tightly Penelope and Colton were holding hands. I suppose we will be seeing more of you, Mr. Orion, Aunt Martha said dryly. Yes, madam, Colton said, if that is all right with you. Aunt Martha looked at her niece, who for once had stopped talking and was just smiling like she had swallowed sunshine, and sighed. I suppose it will have to be. Just have her home at a decent hour. Over the following months, Colton courted Penelope with a quiet determination that gradually won over even the most skeptical residents of Great Bend. He would ride into town on his days off and spend hours just listening to her talk. They would walk together through town, Penelope chattering away about everything she saw while Colton listened with that patient, attentive expression that never wavered. Sometimes he would take her out to the ranch, where she would meet the horses and cattle she had only observed from a distance before, and she would provide him with detailed commentary on each animal's personality and potential life story. The other ranch hands found the whole thing mystifying. They could not understand how Colton could stand to listen to so much talking, but Colton never tried to explain it to them. Some things did not need explaining. In October, the Morrison Ranch hosted a barn raising. A storm had torn down one of the older structures, and neighboring ranchers came to help build a new one. It was the kind of community event that brought everyone together, and Penelope convinced Aunt Martha to let her help with the food preparation. She arrived at the ranch early in the morning with baskets of bread and a berry pie that Aunt Martha had helped her make. Colton met her at the wagon, lifting her down with his hands spanning her waist, and for a moment they just stood there, grinning at each other like they had not seen each other in months instead of just 2 days. The barn raising was hard, hot work, but there was a festive atmosphere to it. The men worked in shifts, hauling timber and hammering nails, while the women organized the food and kept water and coffee flowing. Penelope naturally found herself talking to everyone, asking questions about the construction process, commenting on the efficiency of the operation, offering suggestions for barn organization that were politely ignored. Around midday, when the men broke for lunch, Penelope carried water out to where Colton was working on one of the roof supports. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his face dusty, but he smiled when he saw her coming. "You are working so hard," Penelope said, handing him the water. Colton drank deeply from the dipper, then handed it back to her. "I like that you worry," he said. "Means you care." "I do care," Penelope said, "very much. More than I have ever cared about anyone, if I am being honest, which I always try to be, though sometimes honesty gets me in trouble because I do not always think before I speak. But with you, I want to be honest about everything, including how much I care about you, which is quite a lot, in case that was not clear." "It was clear," Colton said, his eyes warm. "And I care about you just as much, maybe more, though I am not as good at putting it into words as you are." "You do fine with words," Penelope assured him. "You may not use as many as I do, but the ones you use matter. Quality over quantity, as they say, though in my case I seem to go for both quantity and a hopeful attempt at quality, but I suppose we balance each other out that way." "We do," Colton agreed. He glanced around, checking that no one was too close, then leaned down and kissed her quickly. "Now go on back before your aunt thinks I am keeping you from your work." The barn raising continued through the afternoon and into the evening. By the time the structure was complete, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and red. The men stood back, admiring their work with the satisfaction of a job well done, while the women brought out the supper that had been prepared. As everyone gathered to eat, Mr. Morrison, the ranch owner, stood up to make a short speech thanking everyone for their help. He was a gruff man in his 50s, weathered by years of hard work, but fair and respected by his employees. "Appreciate all of you coming out today," he said. "Could not have done this without the community pitching in. That is what makes this place worth living in, knowing your neighbors will be there when you need them." He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on Colton. "Also want to take a moment to talk about young Orion here. Been working for me since June, and I have to say, he is one of the finest hands I have ever had. Hardworking, honest, good with the cattle and the horses. So I wanted to let folks know that I have offered him a foreman position, and he has accepted." There was a murmur of congratulations from the gathered crowd. Penelope's eyes went wide, and she looked at Colton, who was accepting handshakes and back slaps with characteristic modesty. A foreman position meant steady work, better wages, a future. It meant Colton could support a family. Penelope's heart began racing as the implications sank in. After supper, as people began to pack up and head home, Colton found Penelope by the wagons. She had been chattering excitedly to Aunt Martha about the barn raising, but she broke off mid-sentence when she saw him. "Congratulations," she said, her smile bright enough to rival the rising moon. "A foreman, that is wonderful. I am so proud of you. I knew you were good at what you do. Anyone can see that, but to be recognized like this, it is just wonderful, and I know you will be excellent at it because you are good with people even if you do not talk much. People respect you and trust you, and those are the most important qualities in a leader. Well, those and competence, and you have both, so really it is perfect." "Thank you," Colton said. He looked at Aunt Martha. "Madam, I wonder if I could have a word with Penelope alone before you head home." Aunt Martha raised an eyebrow but nodded. "5 minutes," she said firmly. "Then we need to get back before full dark." Colton led Penelope a short distance from the wagons, to where they could have some privacy but still remain visible to the chaperones. He took both her hands in his expression serious. "I took the foreman job because of you," he said. "I need to be able to provide for a wife, for a family." Penelope's breath caught. "Colton, I know we have only been courting a few months," he continued. "I know you come from a city, from a family that probably had more money and more status than I will ever have. I know I am just a ranch hand, even with the foreman position. But I love you, Penelope. I love your voice and your laugh and the way you see the world. I love how you talk to the horses like they can understand every word, and how you get so excited about things other people barely notice. I love that you are yourself, completely and unapologetically. And I want to spend the rest of my life listening to you tell me about everything and anything. So I am asking if you will have me, if you will marry me." Penelope felt tears streaming down her face, and she did not even try to stop them. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, of course, yes. I love you too. I love you so much. I was so afraid to hope that you might feel the same way because you are so wonderful and I am just me. Too talkative and too excitable and too much of everything. But you never made me feel like I was too much. You made me feel like I was exactly enough, and I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else. So yes, yes, I will marry you." Colton pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest while she cried happy tears into his shirt. Around them, the night sounds of the prairie filled the air, but neither of them noticed. They were too wrapped up in each other, in the promise of a future together. When they finally broke apart, Penelope laughed and wiped at her eyes. "I'm getting tears all over you. I am sorry. I am just so happy, happier than I think I have ever been, and I keep crying, which is silly, but I cannot seem to stop." "Do not stop," Colton said gently. "You feel things deeply. That is part of who you are. I would not change it." They walked back to the wagons hand in hand. Aunt Martha took one look at Penelope's tear-stained, glowing face and sighed. "I suppose congratulations are in order," she said dryly. "He proposed," Penelope said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He asked me to marry him and I said yes. And I know you probably think this is too fast. We have only been courting since September, but Aunt Martha, I love him, I truly do, and he loves me. And he does not mind that I talk too much. In fact, he says he likes my voice. Can you imagine? And I know my parents would have wanted me to be happy, and I am happy, so happy." "Your parents would have wanted you to be with someone who treats you well," Aunt Martha said, looking at Colton with a measuring gaze. "I assume you plan to do right by her." "Yes, madam," Colton said firmly. "I will spend every day trying to make her happy." Aunt Martha nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing. But there will be a proper courtship period before the wedding. 6 months at least. I will not have anyone saying we rushed things." 6 months felt like an eternity to Penelope, but she nodded eagerly. 6 months will go by fast enough, Aunt Martha said, but her voice was not unkind. She had seen the way Colton looked at her niece, and she had to admit, even in her stern, practical way, that it was the look of a man who would be good to his wife. The engagement was announced at church the following Sunday. The response was mixed. The women of Great Bend were surprised that someone as quiet as Colton Orion would choose to marry someone as talkative as Penelope Langford, but there was general agreement that they seemed genuinely fond of each other. The men mostly felt sorry for Colton, certain that he would eventually regret tying himself to a woman who never stopped talking. But Colton did not seem to care what anyone thought. He sat next to Penelope during the service, listening to her whispered commentary on the hymns and the sermon with the same patient attention he always gave her. The 6 months of engagement passed in a flurry of preparations. Penelope threw herself into wedding planning with characteristic enthusiasm, and Colton listened to every detail with genuine interest. He was working long hours as the new foreman, but he made time to ride into town at least twice a week to see her. They would walk together or sit on Aunt Martha's porch, and Penelope would talk about the wedding plans or anything else that came to mind, while Colton held her hand and occasionally offered a word of agreement or a gentle suggestion. In November, the first snow fell. Penelope had never experienced a prairie winter before, and she was both excited and nervous about it. Colton brought her a warm coat he had bought with his first foreman's wages, a practical wool thing lined with sheepskin. "I cannot accept this," Penelope said, even as she ran her hands over the soft lining. "It is too expensive. You should save your money for things we will need after we are married, furniture and household goods and all the practical things, not expensive coats for me." "You need to stay warm," Colton said simply. "That is practical. Try it on." The coat fit perfectly, and when Penelope looked up at Colton, bundled in the warm wool, she felt such a surge of love that it almost overwhelmed her. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me." "It is just a coat," Colton said, but he was smiling. "It is not just a coat," Penelope insisted. "It is you taking care of me, thinking about what I need, making sure I will be safe and warm through the winter. That is love, real practical love. Not just pretty words, but actual actions that show you care. And I appreciate it so much. More than I can even express, though I am trying to express it now with words because that is what I do. But I hope you understand that it means everything to me." "I understand," Colton said, pulling her close. "And I will always take care of you. That is a promise." The winter was hard, as prairie winters always were. The temperatures dropped below freezing and stayed there for weeks. Snow piled up in drifts that made travel difficult. Colton could not come into town as often, though he made the trip whenever the weather allowed. On the weeks when he could not come, he sent letters, short, simple notes that Penelope read over and over, treasuring every word. She filled her time helping Aunt Martha with winter chores, reading every book she could get her hands on, and planning the wedding. She also started teaching reading lessons to some of the children in town whose families could not afford to send them to school regularly. It turned out that her tendency to talk extensively about everything made her a surprisingly good teacher. The children loved her enthusiastic explanations and her willingness to answer every question, no matter how tangential. By the time spring arrived in April of 1879, thawing the frozen ground and bringing new life to the prairie, Penelope felt like she had been engaged forever. The wedding was set for early May, just after the spring cattle drive, and she was counting down the days with an eagerness that Aunt Martha found both amusing and exasperating. The Morrison Ranch had built a small house for their foreman, a simple 2-room structure but new and solid. Colton had spent every spare moment over the winter making it ready, building furniture and fixing it up so it would be comfortable for a wife. When he finally brought Penelope out to see it, 2 weeks before the wedding, she cried again. "It is perfect," she said, walking through the small space, running her hands over the table Colton had built, the chairs he had made, the shelves he had put up. "Absolutely perfect. I could not imagine a better home. It is cozy and well made, and you did all this yourself, which just shows what a talented man you are. Not that I doubted it, but still, seeing it all like this, it is just wonderful." "You really like it?" Colton asked, looking uncertain for the first time since she had known him. "I love it," Penelope assured him. "I love everything about it. I love that you built the table big enough for when we have children someday. I love that you put shelves up for books because you know how much I love to read. I love that you positioned the house so the main window faces east so we can watch the sunrise. Every detail shows that you were thinking about what would make me happy, and that means more to me than the fanciest house in the fanciest city ever could." Colton relaxed, his smile returning. "I want you to be happy here," he said. "I know it is not what you are used to. It is quiet out here away from town, just us and the prairie and the cattle." "It sounds like heaven," Penelope said honestly. "I love Great Bend, but it will be nice to have a home that is just ours, where I can talk as much as I want without worrying about bothering anyone, where we can just be ourselves together." "You can always be yourself," Colton reminded her. "That is the whole point." The wedding took place on a bright May morning. The church was filled with most of Great Bend, people curious to see the unlikely union of the quietest man and the most talkative woman in the territory. Penelope wore a simple white dress that Aunt Martha had helped her sew, with a crown of prairie flowers in her hair. When she walked down the aisle and saw Colton waiting for her at the altar, his face full of such open love that it made her breath catch, she felt like the luckiest woman alive. The ceremony was brief. The minister kept his words simple and to the point, perhaps worried that if he spoke too long the bride might start offering commentary. But Penelope was, for once, quiet. She spoke her vows in a clear, strong voice, promising to love and honor and cherish Colton for as long as they both lived. And when Colton spoke his vows, his voice was equally firm, equally certain. "I promise to love you exactly as you are," he added at the end, going off script. "To listen to every word you want to say. To be the kind of husband you deserve, for the rest of my life." There were tears in Penelope's eyes as they sealed their vows with a kiss. And when they turned to face the congregation as man and wife, the applause was genuine and warm. Even the people who had doubted the match could not help but be moved by the obvious love between them. The reception was held at the town hall, with food and music and dancing. Penelope danced with Colton and talked to everyone who would listen, bubbling over with happiness. She told anyone who would pay attention about the house Colton had built, about how kind he was, about how she could not wait to start their life together. And Colton stood by her side, occasionally adding a word or two, but mostly just watching his wife with that patient, loving expression that had not changed since the first night he met her. As the sun began to set, they left the reception in a wagon decorated with ribbons, heading out to the ranch and their new home. The prairie stretched out around them, endless and beautiful in the golden light of evening. Penelope leaned against Colton's shoulder, for once content to just be quiet and enjoy the moment. "Happy?" Colton asked softly. "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," Penelope said. "I keep thinking I should be nervous, you know. It is our wedding night and we are starting this whole new life together, and there are so many unknowns, but all I feel is excited and happy and grateful. Grateful that I came to Kansas, grateful that I went to that church social, grateful that you did not run away when I started talking your ear off. Grateful for you most of all." "I am the grateful one," Colton said. "Never thought I would find someone like you. Someone who makes the whole world more interesting just by being in it." They arrived at their home as the last light was fading from the sky. Colton carried Penelope over the threshold, both of them laughing as he nearly bumped her head on the doorframe. He set her down gently in the middle of their home, and they stood there, holding each other, marveling at the fact that this was real, that they were married, that this was the beginning of their life together. Their first year of marriage was an adjustment, as all first years are, but it was also wonderful. Penelope learned the rhythms of ranch life, waking early to make breakfast for Colton before he headed out to work, spending her days keeping house and tending the small garden she had planted. She missed having people to talk to sometimes, but Colton always came home ready to listen to everything she had been thinking about during the day. He would sit at the table while she cooked dinner, telling her about the cattle or the horses or whatever challenges had come up, and she would offer her thoughts and observations, and somehow they would end up talking late into the night even though Colton had to be up again before dawn. They went into town every Sunday for church, and Penelope would catch up with Aunt Martha and the other women, her words flowing as freely as ever. The people of Great Bend had gradually accepted that Penelope's talkativeness was just part of who she was, and they had even begun to appreciate it in their own way. When someone needed information about anything, they knew they could ask Penelope and get a thorough answer. When the children needed help with schoolwork, Penelope was always willing to explain things in exhaustive detail. In the winter of 1880, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She told Colton over breakfast one morning, the words tumbling out in a nervous rush because she was excited but also scared because having a baby was such a huge thing. And what if she was not ready? What if she was not a good mother? What if something went wrong? Colton set down his coffee and came around the table to pull her into his arms. "We will figure it out together," he said quietly. "And you are going to be an amazing mother. Any child would be lucky to have you." "You really think so?" Penelope asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "I know so," Colton said firmly. "You are kind and patient and you see the good in everything. You are going to teach our children to see the world the way you do, full of wonder and possibility. That is the best gift any parent can give." The pregnancy was difficult at times. Penelope spent the first few months feeling nauseated and exhausted, which she found particularly frustrating because she was used to being energetic and active. But Colton was endlessly patient, taking on extra household chores and making sure she rested. He would sit with her in the evenings, one hand on her growing belly, while she talked about her hopes and fears for the baby, and he would reassure her with his quiet, steady presence that everything would be all right. Their son was born in August of 1880, during one of the hottest weeks of the summer. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Penelope was certain she could not go on. But Colton was there, holding her hand, and Aunt Martha was there with a midwife from town. And finally, after hours of labor, their baby boy entered the world with a lusty cry that suggested he had inherited his mother's tendency toward making his presence known. They named him Charles Matthew Orion. He had Colton's gray eyes and Penelope's dark hair, and from the first moment Penelope held him, she loved him with a fierceness that almost frightened her in its intensity. "He is perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked down at her son. "Absolutely perfect. Look at his little hands and his nose, it is so tiny, and he has your eyes, Colton. He has your beautiful gray eyes." "He has your spirit," Colton said softly, running one finger gently across the baby's cheek. Listen to those lungs. Charles was indeed a vocal baby. He cried when he was hungry, when he was tired, when he needed changing, and sometimes seemingly just because he wanted attention. Penelope, predictably, talked to him constantly, narrating everything she did, singing to him, telling him stories. Colton would come home from work to find his wife and son engaged in what seemed like an actual conversation, even though Charles was too young to do anything but coo and gurgle in response. "You are going to teach him to talk early," Colton observed one evening, watching Penelope chat away to the baby while she nursed him. "I hope so," Penelope said. "I want him to know that his voice matters, that what he has to say is important. Whether he turns out quiet like you or talkative like me, I want him to know that either way is fine, that he can be exactly who he is meant to be." "He will know," Colton assured her. "With us as parents, how could he not?" The years that followed were full and happy. Charles grew into a bright, energetic toddler who inherited the best of both his parents. He had his mother's curiosity and love of talking, but his father's ability to be still and observe before jumping into things. When he was 3, his brother James was born, a quieter baby who seemed content to watch the world go by with calm gray eyes. And 2 years after that, their daughter Helen arrived, as talkative and exuberant as her mother had been at that age. The house that had seemed cozy and perfect for 2 became cheerfully cramped with 5. So in the spring of 1885, Colton began building an addition with the help of some of the other ranch hands. Penelope, heavily pregnant with their 4th child, supervised from a chair in the yard, offering detailed suggestions on everything from window placement to the best way to hang a door. "Your wife sure has a lot of opinions," one of the younger ranch hands said to Colton, not unkindly, just observing. "She does," Colton agreed, hammering in another nail. "And she is usually right, so I have learned to listen." Their 4th child, another boy they named Thomas, was born in July. By now, Penelope had become something of an expert on childbirth, and she dispensed advice to other pregnant women in the area with her characteristic enthusiasm. She had also become the unofficial teacher for ranch children in the area, gathering them together twice a week to work on reading and arithmetic. The children loved her because she made learning fun, turning every lesson into a story or a game, and their parents appreciated that their children were getting an education they might not otherwise have access to. Colton had become one of the most respected men in the territory. As foreman of the Morrison Ranch, he had proven himself to be a skilled cattleman and a fair boss. He spoke little, but when he did speak, people listened because they knew his words were worth hearing. He and Penelope were known as an odd but devoted couple, the quiet cowboy and his talkative wife, and their love story had become something of a legend in Great Bend. "Remember when she first came to town?" people would say. "Remember how she talked so much nobody could stand to be around her?" And then Colton Orion, the quietest man in Kansas, fell in love with her voice. Never seen anything like it. In the fall of 1887, Mr. Morrison decided to retire and move back east to be near his daughter. He offered to sell the ranch to Colton at a fair price, with payment terms that would be manageable even for a man of modest means. Colton talked it over with Penelope, worried that taking on such a large responsibility might be too much. Too much. Penelope repeated, bouncing baby Thomas on her hip while the other 3 children played at her feet. "Colton, you have been running this ranch for years already. Mr. Morrison barely had to do anything these past few years because you were handling it all, and we can make this work. I know we can. We will be careful with money, we will work hard, we will build something for our children. This is an opportunity we cannot pass up." "It will mean long hours," Colton warned, "even longer than now. And if we have a bad year, if the cattle prices drop or we lose stock to disease, we could be in real trouble. Then we will face that trouble together, Penelope said firmly, like we have faced everything else. You are not alone in this, Colton. You have me and I have you, and together we can handle whatever comes. I believe in you. I believe in us. So they bought the ranch. It was now the Orion Ranch, and Colton was no longer just a foreman but an owner. The responsibility was enormous, but Colton rose to meet it, and Penelope was at his side every step of the way. She kept the books, managed the household accounts with a precision that surprised even her, and continued to raise their growing family with the same enthusiastic energy she brought to everything. The years passed, bringing both challenges and joys. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, dry summers when they worried about the grass, years when beef prices dropped and money was tight. But there were also good years, years when the herd thrived and the calves were strong and they could add a little to their savings. Through it all, Colton and Penelope remained as devoted to each other as they had been on their wedding day. In 1890, their fifth and final child was born, a daughter they named Ruth. By now, Penelope was 32 and Colton was 36, and they decided that 5 children was probably enough. Their oldest, Charles, was already 10 and helping his father with ranch work. James was 7, quiet and thoughtful like his father. Helen was 5 and talked constantly, much to everyone's amusement and occasional exasperation. Thomas was 3, and baby Ruth completed their family. The house had been expanded twice more by now, growing to accommodate their large family. It was always full of noise and activity, children running in and out, Penelope's voice providing constant narration, the sound of laughter and occasional arguments. Colton loved coming home at the end of a long day to all that cheerful chaos. After a lifetime of quiet, he had found that he thrived in the midst of his noisy, loving family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Colton surprised Penelope with a trip into Great Bend for dinner at the hotel restaurant. Aunt Martha came out to the ranch to watch the children, and for the first time in months, Colton and Penelope had an evening alone together. They sat at a corner table, holding hands across the white tablecloth, and talked for hours. Penelope, as always, did most of the talking, telling Colton about things she had been thinking about, stories she had heard, plans she had for the ranch and the children. And Colton listened, his gray eyes fixed on her face, occasionally offering a word or two but mostly just taking in the sight and sound of his wife. "I cannot believe it has been 10 years, Penelope said at one point, shaking her head in wonder. "It feels like both forever and no time at all, if that makes any sense. I can barely remember what my life was like before you, but at the same time, I feel like we have always been together, like this was always how things were meant to be." "I know what you mean," Colton said. "Sometimes I think about that night at the church social, when you first came up to me and started talking about everything under the sun. If I had walked away, if I had made an excuse like everyone else did, we would not be here right now. I would have missed out on the best thing that ever happened to me. But you did not walk away," Penelope said softly. "You stayed. You listened. You saw past the fact that I talked too much and you found something worth loving. That changed my whole life, Colton. Before you, I always felt like I was too much, like I needed to apologize for being myself. But you made me feel like being myself was not just okay, it was actually something special. You gave me that gift and I will never stop being grateful for it." "You are special," Colton said firmly. "You always were. I just saw what everyone else was too stubborn to see." They walked home through the quiet streets of Great Bend, hand in hand like young courting couples, even though they had been married a decade and had 5 children at home. The night was clear and cool, and overhead the stars blazed in familiar patterns. "Look," Penelope said, pointing up. "Orion's belt. I think of you every time I see it. My own Orion, my own constellation, the thing I navigate by. That is what you are to me, you know. My fixed point, my true north. No matter what else is happening, no matter how chaotic things get, I always know where I stand with you, and that gives me the courage to be myself." "And you are my voice," Colton said. "You say all the things I never could. You see all the beauty I would miss. You fill my life with words and joy and love. I would not change a single thing about you." They stopped walking and stood there in the middle of the street, holding each other under the stars. Two people who by all logic should never have worked, but who fit together perfectly, because they had each found in the other exactly what they needed. The years continued to pass, bringing with them all the joys and sorrows that make up a life. Aunt Martha passed away in 1893, leaving Penelope heartbroken but grateful for the years they had shared. The children grew up, each developing their own personalities and paths. Charles showed a talent for ranching and a steady temperament that suggested he would one day take over the family business. James discovered a love of books and ended up going to school back east to study law, his parents scraping together the money because they believed education was important. Helen became a teacher like her mother had always unofficially been, running the small schoolhouse in Great Bend. Thomas showed a talent with horses that was almost uncanny, and he started a side business breeding and training them. And Ruth, the youngest, inherited her mother's voice and her father's patience, becoming a singer who performed at church socials and town events. Colton and Penelope watched their children grow with pride and a little wistfulness for the passage of time. The house that had once been so full of noise gradually grew quieter as the children left one by one to build their own lives. Though they all stayed close to Great Bend, none of them wanting to venture too far from home. In 1900, on the cusp of a new century, Colton and Penelope celebrated their 21st anniversary. They were both in their 40s now, their hair showing threads of silver, their faces marked by years of hard work and Kansas sun. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love at a church social 2 decades earlier. 21 years, Penelope marveled. They were sitting on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. "Sometimes I still cannot quite believe that this is my life, that I get to wake up every morning next to you, that we built all of this together. The ranch, the children, this life. It is more than I ever dreamed of back in Philadelphia when I was just a lonely girl who talked too much and did not quite fit in anywhere." "You fit perfectly here," Colton said. "With me, with our family, with this land, you always did. Because of you," Penelope insisted. "Because you loved me as I am. Do you know how rare that is? How precious? Most women spend their whole lives trying to be what their husbands want them to be, but you never asked me to be anything other than myself. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." "It was not a gift," Colton said quietly. "It was just common sense. Why would I want you to be different when you are already perfect?" Penelope laughed and swatted his arm. "I am far from perfect, and you know it. I still talk too much. I still get overly excited about things. I am terrible at keeping plants alive. I burn dinner at least once a week, and I cannot sew a straight seam to save my life." "Perfect for me," Colton corrected. "That is what matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, something they had gotten better at over the years. Penelope had learned that sometimes the quiet was just as meaningful as the words, and that sitting beside Colton without talking did not mean she was holding herself back. It just meant she was comfortable enough to simply exist beside him. What do you think happens next? Penelope asked eventually. The children are mostly grown, the ranch is running well. What is the next chapter for us? Grandchildren, probably, Colton said with a smile. Charles has been courting that girl from the Anderson ranch for a year now. I expect a wedding announcement soon. Grandchildren, Penelope repeated, her eyes lighting up. Oh, I cannot wait. I will get to spoil them and tell them stories and teach them things without having the full responsibility of raising them. It will be wonderful. Though I suppose I should not wish for it too quickly, I want the children to take their time and find the right partners. I want them to have what we have. They will, Colton said confidently. We raised them right. They know what real love looks like. Charles did indeed get married in the spring of 1901 to a sweet-natured girl named Mary Anderson who had grown up on a neighboring ranch. The wedding was held at the church in Great Bend, and Penelope cried through the entire ceremony while Colton held her hand and passed her his handkerchief. Their first grandchild, a boy named Colton Charles, was born the following year, and Penelope was absolutely besotted. Look at him, she would coo, holding the baby while Mary rested. Look at those tiny fingers and those beautiful eyes. He is going to be smart, I can tell already, and handsome like his grandfather, and probably he will have a good temperament too. Neither too quiet nor too talkative, but somewhere in the middle, which is probably for the best, and I am going to teach him so many things. Over the next several years, more grandchildren arrived as the other Orion children married and started their own families. James married a woman he met at university and settled in Topeka, though they visited often. Helen married the new doctor in Great Bend. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a nearby county. And Ruth eventually married the son of the general store owner, a young man who appreciated her singing voice and did not mind that she had inherited her mother's tendency toward enthusiastic talking. Colton and Penelope found themselves at the center of an ever-expanding family web, their children and grandchildren gathering at the ranch for holidays and celebrations. The house they had built together was full once more, but now with multiple generations, all of them bound together by the love that Colton and Penelope had first discovered that night at the church social so many years ago. In 1910, on their 30th anniversary, their children organized a surprise party at the church hall. Everyone they had known over the years came to celebrate, and there were speeches and toasts. Charles stood up to talk about his parents, his voice thick with emotion. My father taught me that real strength is quiet, he said. That a man's word matters more than the volume at which he speaks it. And my mother taught me that joy is something you share, that enthusiasm for life is a gift, and that loving someone means letting them be exactly who they are. Together, they showed all of us what a real marriage looks like. 30 years, and I have never heard them speak an unkind word to each other. 30 years, and they still hold hands like newlyweds. That is the legacy they are giving us, and I could not be more grateful. Penelope cried, of course, and Colton held her close while everyone applauded. Later, when they finally made it home, exhausted but happy, they sat together on the porch and looked out at the land they had built their life on. 30 years, Colton said, shaking his head. Feels like yesterday and forever, all at once. It does, Penelope agreed. She was quieter these days than she had been as a young woman, though she still talked more than most people. Age and experience had taught her the value of choosing her words, but she had never lost her fundamental nature, her joy in sharing her thoughts and observations with the world. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, I mean. Tying yourself to someone so different from you. Never, Colton said immediately. Not once. Not for a single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope. You brought color into a black and white world. You brought music into silence. You brought love into a life that was just going through the motions. I thank God every day that you stepped off that train talking a mile a minute, and that I was smart enough to listen. I love you, Penelope said softly. I have loved you since that first night when you told Mrs. Henderson that you loved my voice. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. Everyone else wanted me to be quieter, but you wanted me to be myself. That was when I knew you were special. I love you too, Colton said. Always have, always will. They sat together as the stars came out. The same stars that had witnessed their courtship and their wedding and every day of their life together since. Somewhere in the house behind them, one of their grandchildren was staying over, and they could hear the child's laughter mixing with the sounds of the prairie night. It was a good sound, a sound of family and continuity and love carrying on into future generations. The years that followed brought the inevitable changes that come with age. Colton's hair went completely gray, and his movements became a little slower, though he still rode out to check on the cattle most days. Penelope developed arthritis in her hands that made household tasks more difficult, though she refused to let it stop her from cooking or writing letters to their far-flung children and grandchildren. They had good days and hard days, but they had them together, which made all the difference. In 1915, the ranch celebrated its 30th anniversary under Orion ownership. It had grown substantially over the years, one of the most successful operations in the region. Charles was running most of it now, with Colton serving as an advisor, but Colton still felt a deep pride in what they had built. The ranch would continue long after he was gone, a legacy for his children and their children. That summer, Colton turned 61 and Penelope turned 57. They were not old by any means, but they were not young either, and both of them had started thinking more seriously about the future, about how much time they might have left together. One evening in August, sitting on their porch as they had done countless times over the years, Penelope brought it up. "Promise me something," she said, her hand tight in his. "Promise me that whichever one of us goes first, the other one will keep living. Really living, not just going through the motions. We have built too good a life to waste a single day of it." "I promise," Colton said, "but you are going to outlive me by decades. You are too stubborn to do anything else." "I am not stubborn," Penelope protested. "I am determined." "There is a difference." "If you say so," Colton said, smiling. They both hoped for many more years together, and fate was kind enough to grant their wish. They celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1919, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. They celebrated their 50th anniversary in 1929, a remarkable milestone that made them minor celebrities in Great Bend. The local newspaper did a story about them, the quiet cowboy and his talkative wife who had built a life and a legacy together. In the spring of 1931, Colton fell ill. It started as what seemed like a simple cold, but developed into pneumonia. Penelope nursed him through it with all the determination and love she had shown through 52 years of marriage, but even her force of will could not hold back the inevitable. On a quiet morning in April, with Penelope holding his hand and all their children gathered around, Colton passed away peacefully. He was 77 years old, and Penelope was 73. She sat by his bedside for a long time after he was gone, holding his hand, talking to him one last time. She told him about all the things they had done together, all the memories they had made. She told him how much she loved him, how grateful she was for every day they had shared. And she promised him that she would keep living, just like she had made him promise years before. The funeral was the largest Great Bend had ever seen. People came from all over Kansas and beyond, old friends and former ranch hands, business associates and family members. They came to pay their respects to a man who had spoken little but whose quiet integrity had touched countless lives. And they came to support Penelope, who had lost her partner of more than 5 decades. Penelope bore it all with a grace that surprised those who remembered the chatty young woman who had arrived in Great Bend so many years ago. She greeted everyone, thanked them for coming, shared memories of Colton with those who wanted to hear them. But underneath the composed exterior, she was broken in a way that she knew would never fully heal. Half of herself was gone. The weeks after Colton's death were the hardest. Penelope stayed at the ranch, surrounded by family, but everything felt empty without him. For the first time in her life, she found it hard to talk. Words, which had always come so easily to her, seemed inadequate to express the depth of her loss. Charles, worried about his mother, suggested she might want to move in with him and marry, but Penelope refused. "This is my home," she said firmly. "This is where I lived with your father. I am not leaving it." Slowly, painfully, Penelope learned how to live without Colton. She threw herself into spending time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, finding comfort in the next generations. She helped Mary with ranch business, offering the benefit of her long experience. She worked in her garden, wrote letters, attended church, did all the things she had always done. But there was a quietness to her now that had not been there before, a sense of something essential being gone. She lived for another 8 years, years that were full in their own way with family and friends and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. She saw great-grandchildren married and great-great-grandchildren born. She celebrated the ranch's 50th anniversary under Orion ownership. She watched Kansas change and grow, moving from the rough frontier she had arrived in as a young woman into something more settled and modern. On a spring evening in 1939, Penelope passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 81 years old, and she had lived long enough to see the world transformed. But the thing she had wanted most at the end was simple: to be reunited with Colton. They buried her next to him in the church cemetery in Great Bend, under a simple stone that bore both their names and the words. They spoke the language of love. The entire town turned out for the funeral, and many people spoke of the remarkable love story that Penelope and Colton had shared, a love that had transcended their differences and created something beautiful and lasting. In the years that followed, the story of the quiet cowboy and his talkative wife became something of a legend in Great Bend. People would tell it to their children and grandchildren, the story of how Colton Orion fell in love with Penelope Langford's voice when everyone else found it too much. They would talk about how love is not about finding someone just like you, but about finding someone who appreciates exactly who you are. They would point to the thriving Orion Ranch, still run by their descendants, as proof that two people who seem completely opposite can build something lasting together. The house that Colton built for Penelope still stands, expanded and updated but still recognizably the same structure. It remains in the family, passed down through generations of Orions, and sometimes on quiet evenings, the current occupants swear they can hear the echo of voices. One low and measured, one bright and enthusiastic, talking together like they have all the time in the world. Because some love stories do not end with death. Some love stories echo on through time, in the children and grandchildren who carry forward the legacy, in the stories told and retold, in the simple truth that real love sees and celebrates the other person exactly as they are. Colton saw Penelope, really saw her when everyone else just heard noise. And Penelope saw Colton, saw the depth and strength in his silence when everyone else just saw a quiet man. They said she talked too much for the quiet West. The cowboy said he loved her voice. And in the end, that was all that mattered, their love for each other and the beautiful life they built together in Great Bend, Kansas, from 1878 until the day they died. Forever linked, forever remembered, forever an example of what love can be when two people simply let each other be exactly, perfectly, wonderfully themselves.